just late by a few minutes. So sorry. Welcome to GER Hub Mathematics and Statistics lesson. In today's video, we shall be looking at measures of dispersion. Okay, so we shall be looking at measures of dispersion in statistics, and we would go quickly into what a measure of dispersion is, and we shall be looking at several measures of dispersion. So welcome to GER Hub. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please smash a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on your notification button after subscription, and we will be seeing you encourage this channel in that way. Thank you very much for your steadfast love to the channel. Now let us begin. Do us a very good favor by telling people about the channel and endeavor to bring them to this class every 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. Nigerian time, 11 p.m. Nigerian time, where we shall be discussing topics in statistics and mathematics. So welcome to the class. Today we shall be looking at measures of dispersion. Okay, so that will be the focus of today's video, measures of dispersion. So I'm going to quickly write here measures of dispersion. So we shall begin this video with answering the question, what is a measure of dispersion? We shall mention several measures of dispersion and then begin our discussion on each of them. So welcome. Now let us start with answering the question, what is a measure of dispersion? So I will start with that. What is a measure of dispersion? So that will be the first question we shall be answering in this video. Welcome, Michael. Welcome. I can see you. Thank you very much for joining the class. Welcome to the class. Okay, so in this video or this live class, our attention shall be on this topic in statistics, measures of dispersion. Now, we will start with objective number 1 under this topic, measures of dispersion. What is objective number 1, everybody? Objective number 1 is to answer the question, what is a measure of dispersion? To make you understand properly what a measure of dispersion is, I would encourage you to search in my YouTube channel for a class I made on measures of dispersion. I'll put the link to that video in this particular video immediately after the class, okay, so that it can direct you to that video easily. We had already discussed measures of central tendency in a video I made some time ago. So please, watching that video, measures of central tendency or measures of location, will help you understand what we are discussing in this class today. However, I will do my best to explain what you need to know that will aid your understanding of measures of dispersion. So let us start with answering this question. Objective number 1, what is a measure of dispersion? So I shall define it in this manner. A measure of dispersion is first and foremost a statistical measure. It is a statistical measure. So there are so many statistical measures in statistics, okay, as a branch of study. So there are so many statistical measures. But what makes a measure of dispersion unique? What makes a measure of dispersion separate from every other type of statistical measure? So it means that it will be wrong of me to say and stop here that a measure of dispersion is a statistical measure. So the question is, what kind of statistical measure is a measure of dispersion? A measure of dispersion is a statistical measure that helps to evaluate the gap or distance between data entries in a data set and a measure and a measure of central tendency. A measure of central tendency, usually the mean. Usually the mean. Okay, so let's go over this definition quickly. Let's go over the definition again. So the first objective in today's class, for you watching from any part of the world, for you watching right now live, and you that would watch this video after now, our objective in today's class is to discuss measures of central tendency. Our first sub-objective in this class will be to answer the question, what is a measure of dispersion? You can't be discussing measures of dispersion and you are unable to tell someone what a measure of dispersion is. So that makes this our objective number one. Answering the question, what is a measure of dispersion? So I'm going to repeat this just one more time, and after this, I'm going to give an explanation. So, definition says a measure of dispersion is a statistical measure, okay? But if you stop your definition at saying it is a statistical measure, you will be wrong. Why would you be wrong? You will be wrong to stop here that it is a measure of, is a statistical measure. Simply because there are so many statistical measures, okay? So the measure of dispersion is not the only statistical measure. As such, you must tell us what type or what kind of statistical measure it is. In other words, what makes it unique as a statistical measure. So it is a statistical measure that helps to evaluate the gap or distance between data entries in a data set and a measure of central tendency, usually the mean. Okay? Now let me give you an explanation, a real life explanation on this particular matter that will help you understand what we actually mean by a measure of dispersion. Now, for you to talk about a measure of dispersion, you must make reference. You should make reference to a measure of location or a measure of central tendency. And the question is why? Let me give you an instance from a real life setting. A measure of central tendency is also a statistical measure. And what kind of statistical measure is a measure of central tendency? A measure of central tendency is a statistical measure that helps to produce a value. It helps to produce a value for a data set we call a representative value. So a measure of central tendency is a statistical measure that is used or that helps to produce a representative value for a data set. Now, an instance will be a classroom, or an instance could be a country, or an instance could be your home, or an instance, a good instance could be your state or your region, wherever you come from. In our respective regions, in our respective classrooms, in our respective domains, there is always one person we look up to in the person of a leader. There is always a leader for a country. There is always a leader for a state. There is always a leader for a community. There is always a leader for a region. There is always a leader in a classroom or a dressing room for a football team or any kind of team, sport team. So there is always a leader. That leader could be one we chose by election. We could have unanimously chosen that person by election, or we could have unanimously selected that person by choice. Okay? Now, however you choose someone to represent a domain, to represent a class, to represent a country, to represent a region or a state, that process of generating or producing, the process that produced that person is what we refer to in statistics as a measure of central tendency. So an electoral process can be likened to a measure of central tendency. Why? The question is why. An electoral process will produce for us someone to represent a country, someone to represent a state, someone to represent a domain, someone to represent a church, someone to represent a class. It will produce for us that one person that will represent an entire class, that will represent an entire country, that will represent an entire state. And because it produces that kind of person for us, to represent us, we call that person the value produced by a measure of central tendency, and we call the process itself that produced that person the measure of central tendency. So what it means is that a measure of central tendency can be compared to an electoral process, or a measure of central tendency can be compared to a choice process where we all look at one person in our class and choose same to represent the class. That is what a measure of central tendency is, and that is what a measure of central tendency will do for us. Now, there is a problem we often encounter, consciously or unconsciously, after a measure of central tendency has produced for us the data set, a representative value, a data entry from the data set. There is a problem unconsciously or consciously we encounter. Immediately a governor is elected, people will start unconsciously or consciously evaluating the distance between that governor who represents the state and every other member of the data set. We often ask questions like, is he doing well? How has his tenure been? Has he done better than the previous regime? Has he done well infrastructurally? What has he put on ground? How well has he served us? We start asking questions like that. How close is he to his people? How close is he to the local people? We start asking questions such as that. Now, that question process is an evaluation process. It's an evaluation process that measures the distance between each person and the governor we have elected or selected. It is an evaluation process that measures how far the representative value we chose through an election process. Good evening, Excellence. Welcome. We are discussing measures of central tendency, and I was emphasizing on an illustration of what a measure of central, we are discussing measures of dispersion, and I was emphasizing by illustration what a measure of dispersion is. So welcome to the class. Please tell your colleagues to join up. I need a good number in today's video. It is very important what we are discussing. Smash a like on the video as you walk into the class and tell your colleagues to join up, okay? If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. Let's continue. So our objective number one in today's class is to answer the question, what is a measure of central tendency? Now, as you can see, I have defined a measure of dispersion. I have defined a measure of dispersion to be a statistical measure that helps to calculate the gap or distance, or evaluate the gap or distance between data entries in a data set and a measure of central tendency that usually will produce the mean. Okay? Now, I was saying that a measure of dispersion is best understood. Ayang Samson, welcome. I see you. Thank you. Smash a like on the video as soon as you enter the class. God bless you. So, I was trying to illustrate what a measure of dispersion is in real life for all of us to understand clearly how to understand a measure of dispersion. So I said earlier on that a measure of dispersion is that gap, that gap between somebody we chose by means of a measure of central tendency and every other data entries in the data set. So who are the data entries in the data set? We all are the data entries in the data set. Representative value of the data set in this case. It may be the governor for a state, it may be the governor for a region, it may be a president for a country, it may be a class rep for a class, it may be a leader of a church or a cult, it may be someone we chose or someone we elected to represent us. Okay? Now, once a person or a subject is chosen, or whether by election or selection, once someone is chosen to represent an entire class, I said earlier on, unconsciously we start asking the questions. How close is this person to us? The previous governor used to come so close to us in society, knowing our needs, knowing our difficulties, and helping the situation. But this person, how close is he to us? Is he far away from the local people? Is he close to the local people? How has he performed? How has he fared infrastructurally? What has he given us? Good roads? Has he given us good amenities in society? Those are the questions people will start asking, and those questions are meant to evaluate how effective, how efficient that measure of the person chosen by a measure of central tendency has been. So what we want to study under a measure of dispersion is simply to understand how different techniques or different statistical measures that can be used to evaluate that gap between a value chosen by a measure of central tendency or obtained by a measure of central tendency and the entire data entries in the data set. So that being said, let us go to objective number 2. Just in case you came in and you came in late, you can look at what we've discussed so far so good by taking the video backwards. But I will prefer you just look at that after the class. Now, we have looked at objective number 1, answering the measure of central tendency. Let us go quickly to objective of discussing each of them, as many as we can discuss in this live class. Okay, so 10:40. So let's see how far we can go within that time frame. We have talked about objective number 1, answering the question, what is a measure of the... I am talking so much. Please understand the fact that so the range is the number 1 of dispersion. Okay, we shall look at another measure of dispersion, deviation, because it does tendency usually is the range that deviation. Okay, is the range that deviation. Okay, I'm going to put by episode. We shall discuss each of them in quick notes among the list of range, variance, mean deviation, absolute mean deviation, standard deviation, and loss. Okay, so now that I have mentioned these in this class, what measures of each of them, what advantages are for each of them, and what the disadvantages are. And if we manage time properly, this is where we shall stop. We shall see what is the range in measure of deviation. I the most senior and most junior, because of the game, there is all there and the dependence. In my life, there is nobody, but if you have been ugly, the ugly your own measure. As a big man, a big body, and short get good of 8, 4, 9, 1 data entries in data and up in the they fill out. They will not compare. That one is 9 in a particular community is seen as intelligent and they will be identity. That man is unique. So being unique means you have a feature or a characteristic that is shared by any based on if I have nothing to say about the other because he has. Okay, now the range is the range considers only the X values that it considered X values. As all disadvantage, it is not completely bad. Okay, there is now range always to n all over n I from I equals 1 to n. Okay,